Because if that low back pain isn't going away, there will 100% be a reason for that. The trouble for a lot of people is that it's not instantly obvious. G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to go through the top 5 main reasons why your low back pain isn't going away, despite all your best efforts, all the exercises, all the advice and treatments that you've been given. And then what I want to get to with each point and each topic that we go through is I want to touch on an exercise or an idea that you can implement that will hopefully quickly rectify that particular issue. So before we get into these ideas, if you're going to enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like rating down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And if you do find any of these tips genuinely helpful and potentially the missing piece to that puzzle, please consider leaving a super thanks donation on the video. It's just a great way to help support the channel going forwards. Now, the first thing that I think is important to cover right at the start of this video is to make sure that you're actually treating the cause of your low back pain. But what I see a lot clinically with my patients is that just because you have pain in a certain part of your back, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that's where the dysfunction is. So a great way to go through this is I have a low back pain playlist that I'll link up here. But what's really important here is that once you've got the context of this video, scroll through that playlist and just see if there's some things there that ring a bell for you. If you're not taking a step back and looking at everything around that section that's sore, then you're potentially missing the root cause of what's generating that pain. Now, the other thing that's really important here, if you have a scan and on that scan you've been given a label based on what's shown on that scan, you need to be very, very careful that you don't get tunnel vision and just focus on what that scan showed. Because the interesting thing about a scan, and any scan, whether it be an MRI, an X-ray or an ultrasound, it can only show you how you look. It doesn't guarantee how you feel. So you can have a disc bulge and have no low back pain at all. But the issue is that you wouldn't necessarily scan your back unless there's pain. So that disc bulge could have been there for a number of years and may never have been painful and may never be painful. But now that you have low back pain, we go looking for things that don't look perfect, that all of a sudden gets given more importance and credence than it should because there's suddenly low back pain in the picture. So it's really important to understand if you have persistent low back pain, we need to make sure that you are very comfortable and confident that you know exactly where your low back pain is coming from, and there's an easy way to check. So if you have a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball lying around, you can very gently and respectfully lie down on your back, let the ball press in and go looking for things that connect to your symptoms. Now, if you have a genuine disc bulge or something sort of really deep in that spine that's generating your pain, you may not be able to find it with the ball, but that's okay. We can lean more towards those things through a process of exclusion, as opposed to just assuming that that's what it is based on a scan that may or may not be connected. So take the ball, put the ball into your lower back, right down the base of your spine, and then lie down on top of it and go hunting for things that shouldn't be there. The process of doing this is we don't want the ball to just stay pressed into the spine at the bottom. If you just let the ball roll off to the side a little bit, you'll hit the spinal joints. If you come out a little bit wider, you'll start to hit some of the soft tissue that's involved. And then all I want you to do is compare both sides. So just see how it feels comparatively. Just go looking for things that feel stiff, tight, or tender. And then also pay attention that if you hit a spot and that generates your pain, whether it either increases your pain or decreases your pain in some way, then clearly you've hit a very important part of the puzzle. And then just gently work your way up the spine, systematically going out to the side a little bit. You'll figure out very, very quickly what's important and what isn't. And the really interesting thing is, if you know that you have a disc bulge or an imperfection in your spine based on a scan you've been given, if you're coming above that more towards the base of your rib cage, and you feel like these sections down here aren't necessarily feeling too interesting with the ball, but when you get higher up, you can see that it does start to connect to those symptoms down low, then you can start to use your personal experience to maybe start to discount what those scans are saying, but you can start to understand that maybe that has nothing to do, or at the very least, little to do with the pain that you're actually going through. Again, point number 1, if you aren't looking at everything around that area, then it's very, very easy to miss where your pain's actually coming from. And that can be one of the main reasons why low back pain persists or comes back down the track. Point number 2 and point number 3 piggybacks off this idea a little bit more. And probably one of the most missed pieces of persistent low back pain is stiff hips. Your body is designed to be mobile and flexible all the time. And if you suddenly start to take away some of the slack of something, then if you still need to complete the same tasks, it makes sense that your body then has to maneuver around or compensate for that restriction to complete the same task. But the problem is if your hips become stiff, all of a sudden, if you run out of that hip range, then your back has to bend to make up the difference. So there's no coincidence that the most common areas for arthritis, wear and tear, and disc bulges, stenosis as well, tends to be the very base of that spine, which is the first spinal sections above your hips. Now, the reason why this is missed so much for so many people is that the majority of low back pain patients don't have hip pain. So if you're not at least assessing the degree of motion that you have at your hips, then you're potentially missing one of the main reasons why that back is consistently asked to stay dysfunctional. Because every time you need that extra hip range of motion that you don't have, then your low back is being included in a conversation more consistently than it should be. So again, it can make it hard for that low back pain to go away if it's consistently being annoyed and included when it shouldn't. Now, a great way to improve this, if you have a band, it doesn't have to be a power band like this. I'll leave a link in the description to these if you want to pick one up, but using a power band or a jump stretch band is a brilliant way to quickly improve the range of motion that you have in your hips, to feed more slack to your lower back and improve the environment that that's functioning within. Now, a great exercise to do here is you want to get this band right up into the hip crease. And we want to get you lateral to the band, so with the band pulling from the side. But again, for the purposes of the video here, I'll just be off on an angle so you can see. What we want to do is we want to take your other leg back out the way. And all we want you to do is just gently come back into some hip flexion. And then keeping your shoulders and hips together, we're going to get you to gently shift your body weight across to the side that you're trying to stretch until you feel a gentle pressure through the side of your hip. You want to stay here for a few seconds. If you feel some jamming in the hip at all, then just come out of that hip flex position a little bit more, but still come across to the side. As it gets looser, you'll find you can drop down further and further. And then what you should find in a very, very short amount of time is that hip should then feel a little bit more mobile. So when you are then moving again, you should have the capacity to move more so through your hips before your back is asked to be part of that conversation. Now, as I said, point 3 is very similar to that, but I want to look above the low back through that thoracic spine. So in the very same way that low back pain can be perpetuated by hip stiffness, if your thoracic spine is very stiff, it works the same way from the top down. And again, a great way to do this is if you can grab a foam roller. You can use the same technique with the lacrosse balls we did with your lower back, but we can mix up a little bit and go for this mid-back foam rolling exercise. So it is a traditional foam rolling exercise, except for one key aspect. I don't want you to roll on the roller. It doesn't do enough of what we need. We're going to make sure that you feel comfortable. All I want you to do is the same thing you did with the ball. Just gently roll to one side to bias one side. Get a sense of how those joints and those rib joints feel. Then roll across to the other side, compare the two. Again, we're looking for the areas that feel restricted. We're looking for the areas that feel stiff and tight. We're also looking for something that might send some pain down a little bit lower to connect to where you feel your pain. But the point I wanted to make here is we don't want to roll up and down, because if we do, we're not getting any pressure down through the joints. And they're the things that we're trying to affect change in. Make sure that you work your way down to the base of your rib cage, down to the top of your lower back, so that you're not missing anything. Point number 4 is a little bit of a turn from what we've just been talking about, and that comes back to stress. So if you are someone who leads a stressful life, whether you're unfortunate enough to have had some really powerful negative stresses in your life previously, whether that be past trauma, abuse of some kinds, anything really heavy, that can have a genuine impact on your low back pain. And this may sound a little bit strange, but the reason for this is relatively straightforward as well. Your brain and nervous system work to a very simple set of rules and circumstances. If it feels safe, then everything's relatively good and functioning relatively well. If your brain and nervous system feel constantly threatened, it's more closely into that fight or flight response that we have when we're in danger. Now, that obviously serves a very important purpose. When there is a threat involved, it allows you to get a little boost of superhuman energy or superhumanness to either deal with that situation and fight your way out of it, or to flee and get out of there really quickly. So when we're in that heightened, threatened state, in nature, essentially we're supposed to be in there for a very short amount of time. You either survive or you don't survive, and then you go on about your day as if nothing had ever happened. But because today's modern world is full of constant stress, whether that be financial stress, relationship stress, religious stress, cultural stress, COVID stress, work stress, even if those sorts of things don't feel like they're a big deal at the time, they're consistently there. Your body can be consistently in a more heightened level of stress. And this is important for back pain because pain is generally your brain and nervous system's perception of threat. So if you find that you've already got a really high baseline of stress that may not be completely overt, it might be in the background that you're not really thinking about, then you will have a lower barrier to generate pain. But then once you cross that barrier, you might find that there's a bit of a pain tax that's slapped on top of what you're already going through. And this is what we see a lot for people who have been labeled with chronic pain, chronic low back pain, is that it stops becoming just a musculoskeletal issue where you have an injury or something's damaged. It now becomes a more complex issue where your brain and nervous system is completely altering your body's perception of what's going on. So if you have this low level threat of maybe a light disc bulge or a joint that's irritated, but you place that into a scenario that maybe has come from, some abuse, or maybe there's been a death that was quite traumatic for you, then all of a sudden your body's going to be spiking more than it should. And the outcome of that can be persistent low back pain and more sensitive low back pain, and back pain that's a lot harder to get through, because unless we get you to go through the process of de-heightening that nervous system, lowering that threat perception, in a perfect world, we would address the reasons for that stress. But for some people, that's not always as easy as clicking your fingers and making that go away. But we can absolutely influence how your body reacts to that stressor. And this is potentially the space to play in for a lot of people. So a great way to try and get that nervous system, that brain and nervous system's perception of threat to decrease and de-heighten is through something as simple as deep breathing. Now, one of the best ways that I've seen clinically to get you from someone who might be maybe an 8 out of 10 on the threat perception level down to a 3 or a 4 really quickly is through something called box breathing. This is a very simple technique that basically requires you to go round in a bit of a box. You breathe in for a period of time, maybe sort of 4 or 5 seconds. Then you pause at the top for 4 or 5 seconds. Then you breathe out for 4 or 5 seconds. Then you pause at the bottom for 4 or 5 seconds before repeating that cycle as many times as you need so that you feel like things start to de-stress and reduce. If you're not super heightened and stressed, you might find that you can feel yourself relaxing after maybe 2 or 3 cycles of that sort of box breathing technique. But for a lot of people who have been chronically stressed and in pain for a long time, you might find that it's a little bit more of a process where you have to consistently keep telling your nervous system down-regulate so that it does down-regulate over time. If we're not looking at what your brain and nervous system are doing to your low back pain, again, we're potentially missing the one thing that you need to focus on to get your low back pain to go away and stay away for good. So please consider that box breathing technique. Again, the number that you choose is based on what you feel very comfortable with. If you're very stressed and very uncomfortable, you might find 3 seconds is a great place to start. And as you feel more comfortable with it, as you get better at the exercise, you might find that you'll get to 6 seconds, 7 seconds, whatever you can do comfortably where you feel like you're not having to gasp for air and you can stay relaxed. So make sure you give that a go. Let me know down in the comments how that particular piece of the puzzle feels for you and how it goes, because it's missed by a lot of people. Now, moving on to the last thing that I see, and this again is potentially the most important, which is why I've left it till last. The single biggest thing that you need to make sure that you master is your postural habits. The positions and the shapes that you put your back into day to day, in most cases that I see clinically, will define how your back pain feels and how quickly it goes away. For the majority of people whose back pain has come on from something that wasn't a blunt trauma to that exact area, when you have this conversation, you often arrive at what you would do with your back day to day, whether that be sitting, whether you're someone who doesn't sit but stands and leans over a lot like myself as a therapist. The shapes and the positions that you get into the most need to be the thing that you analyze and are very comfortable with for you to make sure that you can create a path for this to get better. And the simple reason is that if you sit in a position where you don't take note of your back, the position your back is in will define how it feels the next day and the next day and the next day. So if you've found that, for example, you've got this band of low back pain, but you found that the base of the spine is where that pain's coming from, there has to be a reason why that exact part of your back has become a problem. You might find that that's the exact part of your back that you hinge through, albeit subtly, or a lot depending on how bad you are. Then if you don't then get out of that position and try and stay out of that position forever, hopefully, then that spot's going to consistently be asked to be stiff, tight, tender, and potentially pain producing for as long as you are doing that. So if you're working really hard to go through all these things to fix the reasons why your pain's there, if you're not then having a conversation with yourself, feeling comfortable that you need to be in a better position, then you're potentially missing the whole reason why we're having this conversation in the first place. And I need to stress how important this is. So the way that I say this to my patients is take a second to think about the things that you do most throughout your day. Is it sitting at a desk at work? Are you driving a lot? Play games? Do you watch TV? Are you on your laptop? Do you sit up in bed in that sort of half sitting, half lying position, reading a book? Do you play an instrument? Doesn't matter the activity at all. All you need to care about is what position is your back in while you are doing that. Please try and roll up a towel, jam that into your back so that you're filling the gap that you would be otherwise filling with your back. Fill it with something else. You don't have to hold this position the whole time. You can be held into a better position by a towel or a cushion or something like that. And if you're someone who doesn't sit at all and you're standing at your workstation all day, just make sure that you're not getting into a position where you're leaning forwards through a section of your back that you shouldn't. Make sure that you're hinging through your hips a little bit more. Again, if you have that hip range of motion, you'll be able to keep your back straight for longer. But if you don't have that hip range of motion, you're going to be forced to bend your back in ways that you may not even realize while you're doing it, potentially hinging through a part of your back that you shouldn't be hinging through, perpetuating this whole experience. So with those 5 things in mind, it's really important that you're looking around and taking a step back away from where your physical pain feels like it is. Because if that low back pain isn't going away, there will 100% be a reason for that. The trouble for a lot of people is that it's not instantly obvious. The thing that might be contributing to your back pain hanging around may not be painful in its own right. And to be fair, if it was, you'd most likely be getting that treated, or your therapist would be treating that. So we probably wouldn't be needing to have this conversation anyway. So I hope that was genuinely helpful. Let me know down in the comments below which one of those 5, or maybe all of those 5, you found was a missing piece to that puzzle that you didn't realize that you were dealing with. But with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.